In this video I'm going to talk about how to write a script for documentaries. How do you structure your idea generation process, and what should you think about when you're penning something to paper in order for you to apply for funding. Hello, what's up? So I tried playing some music in the beginning. Let me know if you heard it okay. I'm just testing it out now, technology. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about story development. I've been in this phase right now with the Kino project where I haven't been in Kino since we were there the first time, but we've had two separate teams there. Me and Maddie hasn't been there. So it's been like two separate teams going there, one around like New Year's and one now this past week. So I've been like so freaking busy trying to get everything in order, thinking about narratives and all that without even being there, which is kind of scary, I think, because I couldn't be there, but I needed to kind of be part of that whole process, developing the story and directing from far away, very far away. I think it worked out. It went really well, but when I did that, I started thinking about like, how do you develop all this for somebody else? Because that's what it's all about. Like, how do you leave it to someone else to actually take it to another level and to do stuff from your vision? And that demands a lot of writing and trying to show what your idea is in a clear way. So it's not enough to kind of just go out and shoot, and you can do that if you're on your own, but when you try to collaborate it becomes more difficult. So I thought I would develop a little bit of our process, but also how we develop the pitch document. I'll show you the synopsis for the film, and I kind of will deconstruct that and tell you how it's evolving, because it's consistently evolving throughout the project. Like, there's nothing that's stagnant with the whole project. Like, every day you need to reevaluate the story, so it's always evolving, and you really need to kind of question what you've set out to do all the time. So if you think that you'll write something, you have that idea down, and then that's what you're going to do, that's not the process when you do docs. And that's why I love docs as well, that it's definitely something very unpredictable. I got a phone call, the police wanted our material now when we were in Kino. We had to figure that out. Like, things happen that you cannot control. Moral of the story, go with the flow. Things works out. They did in this case, but you never know what's gonna happen. And yeah, it can get really messy, and it can also be like the type of material that you get will usually be so much better than you can ever write it. So I see the writing phase or the story development phase as something to get me moving and to get funding and to get the project more in a direction than, you know, the actual ID, because the actual ID is something that you develop all through the edit pretty much. Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna elaborate on, but let me know what you want to hear in terms of like story narratives and all that. I just feel like storytelling it's probably the least prioritized skill that you actually develop. Like, people go out and they shoot, they go out and they do all these projects, and like it becomes so focused around the technical things, around like getting the image right, getting all those things that like they don't even matter if you can't tell a story. It doesn't matter how nice your image is looking, it doesn't matter how good audio you have. If you cannot tell a story, nobody's gonna care. So it's a really difficult place to be in, because storytelling is such a craft in itself. Like, you have writers writing stories, and that's one craft. And then you have photographers and I guess videographers, cinematographers doing one thing, and that's video. And then you have like sound designers, that's another thing. When you work with the cinematic language trying to write a story, you need to be all of those in one. So you need to think about like, how do you tell a story cinematically in terms of like, how do you use all the things. to your advantage. So I'll just like maybe explain this in a situation that we were in the last week. We had a meeting that we were in Kino to shoot with the government. We couldn't be in the room because they didn't want us there. They didn't want to jeopardize the situation in Kino because of the cameras and everything. So you know that limitation going in. But the reason why we're there this week is because of the meeting. So the only reason that we booked this time was because of the meeting, and we can't be in the meeting. How do you solve that? Do you skip it? Do you change the narrative? Like, there's a bunch of ways that you can do it. But I think if you use the cinematic language, you can tell about that meeting without being in the room, without having the audio of it. Like, just working with the cinematic language and all the layers of it, you can actually tell the same story, probably in a less predictable way than you would if you could just be there standing and following the stuff that is happening. So the way I usually go about it is probably go more like suggestive and not so clear in terms of what's happening. In the Pearl of Africa, for instance, I focused on how do you get into the mind of Cleo and Nelson as they're in the surgery room and things are changing emotionally. That's what you need to try to tell. That might not be the thing that you see when you put the cameras on and film something. That's something that you maybe have to like do with sound design or with the perspective that your lens is pointed in a certain direction, or whatever the framing is, or is there music, is there no music, is there no sound. Like, that's how you work it. And for this, I think that at least like my direction to the cinematographer who was there was to kind of think about it in a way of like, okay, follow the scenario before, and then going in, you follow it as much as you can, but then as soon as they walk in, you think of it as a vacuum, like the city just stops, and you try to tell that story about like how this city stops during that meeting. And that means like looking at, okay, what inserts do you need, like what type of mood is it at that moment. It's something that only you that is there at that time can feel, and it's totally intuition. So you kind of need to have that eye for that. And then like something happened. There was like in this meeting there was one person collapsing, and then they opened the door, and then he filmed that because then he could film some. And like I haven't seen any material, I've just had it told to me. So you got this dramatic thing happening. So maybe you have that vacuum, which was my direction, but then this occurrence is added on that, and then you need to work with that. And then how do you put together it, because we don't have any audio from inside, so maybe you have to take it from like interviews or whatever it is that's other stuff, like that's around the characters talking about the meeting beforehand or whatever it is. Maybe you need to put effects on that in the editing to make it feel like it is more suggestive and more like in their heads, or you need to kind of capture that meeting and the essence of it in the story, because this is one of the most important events in the story. So capturing that in a heightened way and not just everyday life, to make the audience care more and understand it more on a deeper level. And I mean, those limitations, they're not a problem. You just need to use like your imagination of how to solve those things. And that's really what storytelling is about. But I think most people will kind of get worried that, oh, I might not get this. It doesn't matter. It's about like trying to figure out how do you actually tell the same thing without being there. And there's like a million ways to do that. And everybody has like different things that they come from in terms of like what their inspirations is, and that's what you take it from. So the more like you have in your baggage, the more you can probably come up with ideas quickly, and the more you've worked, the more ideas you have just laying around. That's at least like my thoughts on it. So I don't know what you guys think. Let me know in the comment. KGB Comrade 1, what's your thoughts on Hero's Journey Circle? And is it something you apply in your projects? Yeah, it's always gonna depend, I think, on like, so if you have like, all stories is about the journey, right? But when you have a project that's more about several characters that I have now in Kino, then you need to think about it in a different way, because you need to have like the overall arc is something that you work around, and then you pick the characters to tell that story. So we have a conflict that we're trying to follow everyday life, like how does it affect everyday life, and how do they kind of go about their lives living in this conflict. And basically it's about the people living there. That's the main theme of the whole story. But in the background is a growing conflict that you don't know what's going to happen. I'm guessing in the end, like, there's a festival and they're going to be happy, and I don't know what the twist is going to be in the end. But the story arc, you know the progression of your story, or you should know like the direction where it's going to end up. So for the Kino project, the start is somewhere as they understand that they are in jeopardy, like their lives are in jeopardy. For instance, it's polluted, mining company is coming in and is threatening their festival. That's like the starting point. You need to have that. From that, you kind of build out everything to come to whatever your thought climax is. I haven't figured out the climax. What I do know is that the main conflict, that's pretty much the people living there. They're trying to go about their daily lives, but they're so divided. And I can just say this, like, I cannot write as good of a story as is in this town. Like, it's impossible. Every time we go there, it's just like, whoa, did this just happen? I don't even understand how this is like real life. It's that good, and that comes down to casting the right people that has the conflict in them. So we have, or in the beginning when we came there this time, we had basically 2 people that we were following, and then another couple that isn't there in the wintertime wasn't there, and then we just followed these people during this period of the shoot. But then as we were there, we started realizing that another character is probably the main character as well. So we have 3 characters now, where 2 of them are probably the main characters. One of them we just discovered on our trip there this time. So even though we know what the main conflict is, because the city has a main conflict with the mining company, and the conflict in itself within the city is a division between the 2 camps, basically. How do we deal with this outer threat to the city's existence? That's basically the main conflict. And then you pick the characters that embody that conflict in the best way and the most cinematic way. And now I think we found the perfect on the other side of the conflict type of character. We had 2 characters that we were thinking, which is the main character on the one side, and then now we have like the perfect one on the other side. And those things, they just evolve as long as you have a clear understanding of what the central conflict is. And then eventually, like, things evolve. Like, I know where the end is, or where the climax probably is, and that's around a festival that's this fall, and it's the main festival for the town. And that festival embodied the whole conflict as well, because on the doorstep of the camping ground for the festival, the mining company has a mill and they're throwing their garbage. So you need to think about like those things, and how do you embody the conflict within scenes and the story, and all those things that you can come up with to make the story be like life and not just interviews, that type of thing. But then eventually, as you go about it, you start to connect things and you start to understand what the climax will be. But I really don't know yet. Like, you just need to go with it. Like, I do know where we're going, but I do not know how we're gonna flip it in the end, because you need to do that eventually. But the process will show, hopefully. How can I use visual comedy in my storytelling? Too simple. Hi from Vancouver. Hello. I think there's a film that a friend of mine did, which is a hilarious one. He's very inspired by, I guess, Aki Kaurismäki and probably Roy Andersson as well. What is it called? Polish. Let me check. Polish Illusions. Polish Illusions. Check out Polish Illusions. I don't know if you can find the film, but I know the trailer is up and something. That's a really funny film that uses composition and the like tempo, and I guess also the sarcasm towards the characters, that makes it like hilarious. It's so freaking fun, the film. It actually premiered at Hot Docs, I guess 2015 or something. But it's a really good film, and it's a really good example of how you can do comedy without it being, comedy in that sense. It's just absurd type of reality. Yeah, it's pretty much what Aki Kaurismäki does, I think. Marti Fowler, do you think of a story backwards? Know what your ending is before you build. I don't do that. Like, I know where I'm going. I know what the main conflict is. And I'm always thinking about like what scenes would tell about that conflict and how do we connect things so that it becomes clear. It's really hard to kind of keep a track of things, because you really need to go in and you need to watch the material you have. So now I've been like reviewing a lot of the interviews and the stuff that we shot, me and Maddie, the last time or the first time we were there. So I've been reviewing a lot of that, and I've been like trying to understand where the story is going and what we have in terms of like stuff that they're saying, what can we build on, because a lot of the interviews, they will show you a direction what you need to capture cinematically, meaning that like, okay, in one interview he's talking about trucks going by on a new road past the town, and they are really loud. I haven't experienced that, but now when I listen to the interview, I'm just like, okay, that's the perfect scenario of throwing like the viewer into the feeling of it being too close and intruding in their daily lives, but without it being something that you have to say. If you just have that noise and the dust of a truck, it's going to be pretty obvious. So you need to kind of think about those things as you review the material, the scenes, the interviews, and try to like pick out stuff that connects and that envision the conflict, because everything should be about the conflict basically. So as long as you do that, I don't see there being like it's not a problem to not know where it's going to end. I don't think most people have any clue where it's going to end, or they set out to have one ending and then it changes. Because the nature of doc filming is that it changes. Like, it evolves during the process, and you get deeper into the story and understand the story more. And then to make a good ending, you need to switch it around to kind of capture how the idea has evolved. I don't know really where the film will end. I think that it's going to end probably at this festival. But when you're there, anything can happen that just makes total sense to continue shooting. And I don't like say that it's done at that point, but I see that ending now, and then like I'm open for anything can happen. And I think that you need the direction in terms of like a timeline. Okay, so we're capturing this from this point to this. This is pretty much a year that we're following, and we're following this conflict during that year. And then everything that you shoot and everything that you really want to film actually should be connected to that. You shouldn't shoot scenes that is just stuff with a character. Everything should come back to like, how do you actually develop the story narrative? And it's a little bit different, because when you actually write a film, like, you would start with, okay, so you use the templates, you use Final Draft or Scrivener or something like that. Those are the programs that you usually write scripts in. And you go through and you do revisions, and like you shape the narrative so hard that like when you shoot, you pretty much know what the film is going to be, and the editing is not that hard to figure out like what the narrative is going to be if you didn't screw up entirely. Doing docs are like the complete opposite of that, and I know a lot of people from Sweden at least that are working in a similar way where they write the script and then they go out and they improvise, and that will generate a similar process, I think, because you have the story is written and you have the idea back of your mind type of clear, but then you go out and you shoot and you like throw that away in a way, and you just go with the characters on this journey. I think that's what makes it so organic when you film docs, is that you don't really know what's going to happen. It all comes down to like assembling it in the edit, and that's where you write it. So I don't want to talk about like, okay, so you write a treatment and then you go out and shoot it. That's not how you do docs. It doesn't work like that. Like you might have to do that for applications and you might need to know how to do that, but you need to know that it's not going to be the film. Like if that's the film that you're making, it's going to be a shitty film that is totally predictable and that somebody else has made exact same thing. Like the nature of docs is that you go out, you discover this topic, these characters, their lives, you go with the flow, and that's where you get the organic narrative. But you need to always be like putting your filter on it to make it a cinematic piece that actually has a consistency and that is clear to the audience. And most of the time I think that comes down to figuring out the main conflict and then just working out scenes that are connected to that, and the characters that are of course connected to that. I think that's super important. So like just to go through like a little bit about research. I've talked about research so much, so I'll just talk about like how we did with this thing, because you usually start and you research something. I found like we had actually shot for I guess 3 or 4 weeks in 2 different locations, Lofoten and Piteå, Sweden. So the idea was a different one when we started. That might still become a film, but Kino has been extracted from that, and Kino has been turned into the main story. So in the beginning, the main concept that we had was surrounding 4 stories around the world that told this conflict about like environmental problems, and everything was daily lives with people. So it was one fisherman in Lofoten, it was one refugee from Syria in Piteå, and it was in Kino. We were looking for a character, but then we got there and we understood that this is the same story that we're trying to tell in 4 corners of the world actually exists here in like a microcosm. So then we changed the whole idea to be about that. And in the beginning, I don't even remember like how well of a pitch we had. I don't think it was very like well written at that stage. We had a trailer, we pitched it, we got some development funding, and then we went to Kino, and then we understood that like this is the story. And when you see that, when you're filming something, you have written this and you go out and you try it, and then you realize that this is so much better than what I set out to do, and it just feels good like straight away, and you don't have to like work against the story, because that's often the case. Like I was surprised how easy it's gone until now, when we had a little bit of trouble this filming occasion. We had most trouble we've had in the project was this time, and I'm so used to it, so it doesn't stress me out. It's just a matter of like solving it and figuring the stuff out. But we still haven't solved everything. But I guess I just want to stress how important it is that you don't decide that this is the story and go out and make it. Okay, so what you essentially want to do when you develop the idea, because it comes down to doing the research, like I said, we found an article in New York Times that led us to go there. But before we did that, we contacted the journalist, we talked to the journalist a bunch, we did like pre-interviews, we employed a person that lived in a neighboring town that was the first assistant director now. He was there with a cinematographer shooting everything. So we found a person that could go to Kino, do the interviews, like pre-interviews, meet with the people, see if they were interested. And he had all the local knowledge, which is crucial to kind of maneuver any story that you're not, inherent belonging in. Because when you come as an outsider, you need to figure out, like, how do you maneuver this local story? Otherwise, you have no place being there. So we got him involved, and that kind of led us to kind of figure the story out. But I don't figure the story out until I'm standing there. And it's very similar when you're a DOP. You don't know anything about the real solutions that you're gonna do in terms of lighting, compositions, and all those things without location scouting. So when we got there, that's the first time that you actually get a feel for the story and for the characters. So you need to go there and meet them and start filming with them, in my opinion, to actually find the direction of the film. Because after that, like, we see, okay, this is the story, we had an idea of what it was, it's still that, but you have to tweak it a little bit. And then when you go back and you write something, is when you can actually write something that's pretty valuable, I think. I thought I would show you a PDF, but let me take some questions first, and then I'll show you like a short part of the pitch as it is now, and now it's going to be rewritten as we're developing it all the time. Francesco Pagliaro, hopefully. What do you think about document 2 out of 3 weeks experience? I'd change. What do you think about document 2/3 weeks experience? I don't know what that is. That's probably something I should know about. It changed a lot than a big doc. I don't know. Explain what that is. If it's something like special, I'm not entirely sure what you mean. But let me try to get this PDF up so you can see it. Now, how do we do this? We go into. It might get black for a second. Let's see. We have preview short. Here we go. Okay. Can you see it? No? Here we go. Okay, so now you can see it, right? Let me know if you can see it. So this is just like the first page or whatever. Kino, film by Johnny Wallström, blah, 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 blah. So the logline. This is what you really need to figure out. So the logline is pretty much what summarizes the whole story. If you can't write a logline, you're in big trouble, I think. It's essentially what summarizes the conflict and what people will want to go on in terms of a journey. So for this, the logline is, there is a strength to the people of Kino City, not only with strong personalities that sometimes clash, but also strength is evident in their fight to stay in this faded gold rush town, to try saving their community from a catastrophe. This is Andre that's written this, so it's a lot of grammar problems. These citizens are forced to get along or risk losing their way of life forever. Anyway, so this is basically summarizing the whole conflict in an overarching type of way. I could probably, let me see if I can see the other one as well on the other screen or something. Okay, so this is what it was in the other one that we had. Ragged and eclectic scoundrels are fighting each other to stay in a faded gold rush town, to save their weird city from contamination. These not so upright nor outstanding citizens are forced to get along or risk killing the city for good. Okay, so the last one is what I wrote. The other one is what we presented to them. So it's a little bit different how you would talk about it depending on who you're talking to. So this is just like summarizing everything as much as you can. You don't really know in terms of like what the story is basically like it's always evolving, but you need to summarize it for application purposes foremost. That's what this comes from. It's not something that I would like care so much about if you don't want to do applications. But when you do applications, it's actually a really good way for you to develop your story. Because I usually use the applications to push my project further. So let me see if I can just show you again here. Next page is this one is just some shots of the main characters showing a little bit about like what it's about. We're probably going to develop this a lot now, I feel, but this is what it was in this presentation. Okay, Yukon is known for its wildlife and for its gold and silver. I don't know, this doesn't say that much, so it's mainly towards them. It doesn't have a punch. In the one that I had before, it was like Yukon is known for its bears and the gold rush, but also the colorful 5%, unique and ragged people with lives unlike the rest of us. So I would say it needs to be something that has more punch in it, but depending on who you're talking to, you would talk about it in a different way. Okay, so here's the synopsis. I'll just jump into the synopsis itself. So Kino City is a faded relic of an authentic gold rush era town at the end of the Silver Trail, where adventurous tourists go to experience the Boji Yukon. Is that how you pronounce it? Bygone Yukon. Of course it is. Stupid me. Away from the constraints of modern society, a rugged lifestyle that demands an abundance of character and grit, with cold winters sometimes reaching minus 62 Celsius. Only 8 people have decided to live here all year round. To them, this place is a paradise. But now an ore processing mill has recently been built on the doorstep of the little town. People are outraged, fearing that the mining that once contaminated the drinking water with uranium and arsenic is starting all over again. So basically, to here you've captured like the background of everything, and basically the conflict in itself has been established. And then you go on and locate. So they fear that the area will like kill the tourism, and they will kill the animals and the environment. Within a community built by eccentrics, outcasts and loners, can this band of citizens come together to save the city, or will mining kill it for good? Kino is a study about how outside forces can try to destroy a community from the inside out by fighting each other. It's a part of the universal story of being human and caught in the global conflict of extracting nature's resources, no matter the borders, traditions, or lives affected, told in a tiny community of individuals who do not always get along, but now they might have to in order to save their city. Okay, so that is basically how I would summarize the whole story. So from that, like you could take like a bunch of directions. So you have like the faded gold rush town. You need to establish that. You need to establish that visually. You need to try to tell that story. Where is it? It's in Yukon. What's Yukon famous for? These enormously special characters and the vast nature and all that, and also the mining. And they live lives that are like very out of the ordinary. And it's very much like traditional way of life, so not the modern society type of life. And it's like the harsh winters and everything is what we've tried to capture. That's why we've been there now. And I think you need to try to build up this place as quickly as you can so that people can visualize where the conflict is taking place, in order for you to kind of get the people into the story as quickly as possible. And then as you continue talking about what the changes are, so people are outraged, they're fearing that the mill that has been built there is going to destroy the city basically. They're fearing that the mining is going to contaminate the place. In essence though, like how I envision it is to capture it through the the wildlife, especially because they're hunters. So one of the main characters is casted because of how he's working. He has a little small mining claim and he is a nature lover. So you know that with him you can get these scenes out in the vast nature. That's who we went canoeing with. It's also like the mining claim where he goes and he does like small time mining. That gives us an opportunity to talk about mining in a natural way. So you cast these people to tell that story, and then the conflict in itself, that becomes like the different opposite sides of this, because we don't know which is the truth. Like both of these are telling their story and we have no clue what the truth is. We're trying to make the film to understand that, and that's why you don't really know where the film is going to end, because you don't really know what is going to happen within like that story that you're trying to understand. And that's how you should set out to do it, I think. And now they might be like lead poisoned. That's the indications that we're feeling that they might be. So we might have to follow up on that. All these things, they come as you go and you shoot a little bit. You get this clue to, okay, so maybe we need to go to the doctor with one of the characters at least, and to see and measure those things. So you need to try to build up the conflict as you go along. And then as you do that, you understand the story and you understand the story narrative more and more. And then it's just a summary of what the story is about. But this is what I would essentially write if it's an application. This would be like a long synopsis. So I don't know, let me know how you write synopses and all that, but this is what they basically will read about your project. The logline and the synopsis. All the rest is just fluff. Like, it's good to have, but these have to be the best. And then the trailer. So when you have those things, you can really pitch a project and you can get funding and all that. But without it, it's super hard. Okay, so Luis Nacido. How do you get authenticity when writing a script? Or do you have the answers you want your interviewee to tell, and you figure out questions that will lead them to those answers? Like it's a bit of a mix, because you need to listen to the story and not like put words in their mouths. But at the same time, you need to find the direction and get them to say stuff in the clearest way that you can get an audience to understand the conflict. And when you do a film, you're packaging it, right? The story. So like I heard like a podcast now where they were kind of criticizing that a Swedish program was doing reenactment to tell a story about the police in Sweden, but they couldn't get, because they changed the law in Sweden, so they can't film with police anymore in Sweden. They can't put a lav on police to film them. So the only option they have to do the journalistic work is pretty much either like not show the first-hand perspective or do reenactments, and they went with reenactments and they got criticized for that. That's like on the other end of the extreme, but in a way, when you do any type of film, like if you look at what, for instance, Werner Herzog really states, and Errol Morris as well, like the key is to get to the truth of the story, the real truth. It's not about showing like daily life and showing the real life that you see when you're filming. It's how you assemble it that actually tells the story and gets emotionally across to the audience. So when you do interviews, you write questions that try to simplify things and make it understandable for the audience, and also that evokes the emotions that you want out of a person while they're saying things. I usually try to avoid doing interviews as much as I can. Now, for this film, there's actually been a bunch of interviews, and it's just partly because I'm not there, partly because the first time we were there was also like research, trying to understand the story. I much more prefer to just be like a fly on the wall and just not have any interviews at all. But that demands a lot more time, and the people that we've been following do not feel like they would give you much time. So then that way is easier to do it. But in order for it to be organic, I feel that you need to try to do a scene and then like throw in questions that are relevant to the scene. So the more you can kind of pre-structure what the questions are going to be, the more you can picture like, okay, this scene is perfect for asking that, and to get an emotional response, because you always have certain situations where you'll get better emotional responses from a person. And I don't think sit-down interviews are all that good, actually, because they don't get that emotional impact, because it's just like sitting and talking. Much like in podcast, how many podcasts have you listened to where you get that like emotional depth that you can get in a doc when you get somebody talking in a certain situation where like their mind is spinning? Like, it's very rare that you get them there. You might get them there if it's a super serious subject, but it's very hard to get them there on general things. So I much more prefer that they do stuff which is related to what they would talk about, and I would just let them do that for a while, then maybe throw out the question, and then they would answer it while they're thinking and doing something. That's how you get more organic things, I think. Okay, where was I there? No way, I'm just looking at Gold Rush on Discovery. Yeah, it's very different from Gold Rush, I might say. Somebody told me about Gold Rush, and I just hate that type of reality. So, not judging you or anything, but I just think it's not what I want to do. So, I was watching it and I was just like, oh, is this going to be something that's going to be done already? But it's definitely not. But those characters that you see there, like a lot of them come in, I think, and are foreigners to the place, to Yukon. But if you look at the authentic Yukoners, they are so much what Kino City is, but Kino is like probably times 10 or something of that. Then you have the place. Gosh, without solid direction for the story, you might end up with plenty of footage to digest during post-production. Yeah, that's the balance there. I think that I use most of the stuff that I shoot. Like now I was questioning 2 characters that we've shot with. Will we use them because we found a different character? Maybe those would go away. But I always feel like you don't have enough with each character. So for the Pearl of Africa, for instance, we had a couple of scenes that ended up being just like 10 seconds for one thing, I think. But it's the best joke in the whole film. That took like half a day to shoot. So you need to really value those things as well, because it's the best joke in the whole film. It's in the trailer. It's the joke. Took half a day to shoot, and it's 10 seconds in the film, or 20 seconds, whatever. But you can get those scenes where you just shoot and you see something else, but then it's not relevant. But then you find something in it. You're always going to find something that's valuable, I think. But yeah, tons of material. But really, I think that like that discussion, because I often hear that you can overshoot. I shoot a lot, and I never feel like I overshoot, and I never feel like it's a problem in the edit either, because I'm quick to throw things away. So if it's just like kill your darlings, then that's easy for me. But I think that you need to be able to process the material, and you need to shoot on a level that you're able to process it. Because if you shoot too much and it becomes difficult, then you've overshot. But I rarely feel that. It's just an advantage to have alternatives, I think. Louis it's Nasiro again. Do you script out actions for your main characters or fly on the wall filming them? Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this before. I don't like telling them what to do, so I won't tell them to, like, okay, they picked up the phone, and then I won't tell them to pick up the phone again. Then I would just think that it's my fault that I didn't capture that. So in that sense, it's like fly on the wall. But what I do is I direct the type of scenes. So for instance, when we're going there this time, let me see if I can get a list of what scenes, because I had like lists of scenes that I wanted, and then from that you work. So some things might not be possible, then you need to like restructure your plan, but I always have like a pretty solid idea of what it is that I'm going there to do, but it's just a list of scenes. Okay, so for Christmas, we're there on like the 28th of December. This was basically the list. The objective of being there was to capture the mood of Christmas. Only a few brave souls stay for winter, and capturing the community coming together, preferably at Jim's place, which is a bar that's open there. And then capture the landscape during winter, what it's like in the town, and then what does Scott do during Christmas and holiday celebrations, and what does Jim do during Christmas and holiday celebrations. And the reason why I wanted to be there is because this is about the community, like Christmas is about love and understanding and like happiness, and the mood is really nice when it's dark and it's cold, and that little town is totally isolated. So that was the list. Not a lot of stuff, and then you go from there. You try to direct those things. For the trip that we had now, these were the old ones, right? Okay, so this is the list. This is a bit bigger because we're there much more days, so I won't say everything, but this is basically it. So I had a drone list, and these are basically all the main buildings that are part of the story. So just general drone stuff. But then it was these scenes as well. So Scott trapping, snow machining on land, Scott living at the mining claim or being at the mining claim. What else? Yeah, and here's the meeting. This is what I wrote, like follow on our main characters, and then building an establishing shot, people going in, people coming out, reactions. One camera follows one character from his place. Story focus is the threat that they're facing. And then that was like the main idea before I knew that we couldn't go in there. So then I changed it to what I said before. Other scenes to capture, Jim going to the meeting, Jim after the meeting, Scott, can we film him trapping, and can we do it with a drone? Scott is moving, can we capture that? Scott's new home, will Dirk and Tracy be there? They wasn't there. Can we film something with Joella? No, we couldn't. And then like it goes on, but that was like the main structure that I had. And then from that, like I realized as we were coming closer, things changed. It was something totally different. I had to restructure that idea, but it's pretty consistent. And then every day that they were there, they sent me like, okay, so this happened today. And then we talked through, I gave them new directions of what to shoot. So basically, do this with him. For instance, we had a map that Jim had, so film him with a map talking about the places that they've changed the streets to establish the conflict before they go to the meeting. That was one thing. So then you direct that they actually shoot that scene. That's how I would direct. Or for instance, go with Scott to the mining claim, then you would have to go there on snowmobile, so then that is also how I would direct it. Or at Scott's place as he's packing, that's important for the story. So those type of directions I give, but then as those scenes are happening, I just follow along, and then like whatever happens happens, pretty much. And then I throw out a question, and that is how I direct things. Like the type of questions that I throw out will throw it in a little bit different direction or mood all the time. Okay, so another question. Do you script out actions for... Oh, that was the one, but it was... okay, no, that was the same that I answered. Is the film you're discussing a docu or a fiction film? It's a documentary, but it's a documentary, but it is on... it's a very cinematic documentary, so in a way, like, think of the Netflix originals documentaries and then how cinematic they are. That's the type of documentary that we're making, and I think that those demand a bit more planning than you would do otherwise if you just run and gun type of shoot. Now we have a documentary process where we're shooting in run and gun type of way, but much more controlled. So that's how I would explain it anyways. Talk about the difference between a synopsis and treatment, Roy Hurst. Treatment is basically scene by scene type of development of the whole story, and I find that really difficult to write. I just feel like there's not really a point to it, and I don't think you get anything out of it in terms of applications, because nobody wants to read it. They usually just want the synopsis and the trailer. That's what you go on, and then it's a conversation between you and them. But for yourself, you need to know the story so that you can pitch it in a way that it feels like natural, and then maybe you need to know about it in a way that a treatment would be in a way, but a treatment is basically scene by scene, just structuring out and laying out the story. And for me, that's just, it's make-believe for any doc, so I find it really difficult. But it's probably, if you're used to writing a lot and you feel like that's a natural way of doing it, it can also be called outlining if that's also a simpler form of it. Treatment is more of like, it's written here basically in the synopsis that I showed you, while the outline would be a little bit simplified. But I just think that you need that as you're going along. You're trying to develop it, but I wouldn't write that first. That's how I develop the story as I'm moving along. Like, I'm writing out everything. I'm maybe putting stuff on post-its, like scene by scene, trying to structure everything and understand the narrative, but it's not the first thing I do. So it's probably now, when I get the material back and we review everything, we've probably shot half of the film. That's when I start to write, like, treatment wise, and start to develop that from the scenes that we have. But usually I want to get the material, I want to edit every scene, and then I want to watch the material and try to understand the story and piece it together. And now we're at that stage where that's natural, so I wouldn't do it the first, but in the middle of the project instead, to find the direction and story narrative before you screw up and are finished with everything. What footage do you use for the trailer? Is that a separate trip before you start the doc? Actually, Roberto Fellini visuals. Actually, we did this project in a different way than we normally would, because we're collaborating with Marti, who's the executive producer and the cinematographer for the project. So in this way, we knew because of that, because all of us are YouTubers, we knew that we wanted to work in a different way. So we wanted to go there to shoot a behind the scenes series. We wanted to shoot for the crowdfunding film that we did. And then we also wanted to have enough material for the pitching. So we went there on the first trip without much funding. We had a little bit from the Swedish Film Institute, but then that kind of covered the first trip and us going there. It was just me and Marti, and then Chris, who's based in Dawson, which is pretty close. And then that trip kind of laid the groundwork for everything. And what I feel is one of the most important things is that if you're directing anything, you need to be there as early as possible, or as a writer, to actually feel out the story for real. Because now that I've done that, it's actually pretty easy to direct other people, like our secondary unit team, to actually go there and film it. That was much easier now when I actually have a feel for everything and I know what is there. Without that, it wouldn't be possible, I think, to film that way and still have it be a solid perspective in the end. Carl Joyce, do you usually think of how the mood of the doc will be before you shoot anything, or do you just go with the flow and see how it unfolds? Yeah, this was actually one of the key things for this film, was to kind of nail that early on. Me and Maddie did that pretty early. Let me see if I can just find how I presented it now to the DOP, who was supposed to like take over from what me and Maddie had been working on. So we went there and we had a plan. Me and Maddie had an idea of what it was. We had looked at references. I had kind of made a mood board of stuff. So I knew what I wanted going in, and then me and Maddie found that while we were there and tried to develop it like on location. Do I have it? Actually, maybe I just have it on the other computer. I could download it though. Yeah, so now that they were going, I had to kind of think about like, okay, how do I make it as clear as I can in terms of how it's gonna look, and then like I ended up going with a lot of like Revenant type of references in terms of the style, even though like it's the stuff that we had shot was not like Revenant type of material, but because they were there in the winter, it felt like that was the type of footage that we wanted. So let me see if I can find this project. Here we go. Where do we have this? Here we go. Kino Mood. Is this the one? Yep. So this is how I would break it down for a DOP. And I don't know, some people might think this would be going overboard, but when you're not there and you can't talk about somebody, I just feel like this is so crucial. So let me see if I can do this as quick as possible. Mood. Okay, here we go. So this is the stuff that I show him, just to give him directions going there. So protect the highlights, expose for background and position camera for best image from that. Don't be afraid of underexposing faces. Try to build up depth in the composition with background, creating depth, so we avoid that it becomes a person against a wall. So basically just looking at like the depth in terms of like when you shoot into the shadows, which is a lot of shadow, and then you have the depth through the lighting going on, it just creates a certain mood, and that's what I was going for with this. And then stay wide. We had decided earlier that we wanted to be around like 20 to 35 millimeters. So then I just showed some examples of like how a close-up would look and how the mid shots would look. We don't have that much of a reference of the wide shots, but so basically this is what I was trying to get him to do. And then like the final format is 235 probably, so we expose for that in terms of getting a lot more of the environment in to tell a story. So try to capture that in like the footage and everything. Instead of having like inserts or B-roll of how the environment is, you want it to be in the frame itself. And then for the meeting, which we couldn't shoot, but the idea was to shoot everything on telephoto lenses because it's going to make it easier to cut it. So instead of having everything be the type of wide shots that we usually do in terms of framing people, we would go much closer to be able to capture the whole scene more cinematically, because when you do stuff too wide and show too many people, it usually becomes too much of a doc look, I feel. And then like think of everything in scenes, so I was trying just to get them to not be shooting like one-off type of b-roll stuff, instead build up scenes. So for instance, you go from establishing shot, you have this person doing something, and you try to tell a story naturally with each shot that you're shooting. And then like shoot into the shadows, like don't be afraid to underexpose the characters, as long as there's a depth and light in the background. And then like dare to be suggestive in terms of like what you focus on. Don't shoot everything in like the literal way. Try to interpret the story narrative visually. And then like be a fly on the wall, just let things play out and wait for things to happen. That's basically what the direction was in terms of how to tell the story. So I could really recommend doing that for yourself, but it becomes more clear when you have to do it to somebody else, for somebody else to understand what you're actually thinking. Yeah, so a synopsis, when you're drafting that, like you really need to find the main conflict. That's super important. You need to structure the idea and the story, like what is it about, who's the hero, what are they fighting against, what's the timeline that they will go on this quest, and what is the quest that they will go on, what theme embodies this conflict, and how do you use their personal story to exemplify that, like visually or cinematically. And then like you need to just figure out the direction and to be kind of open to it changing always. Yeah, that's just synopsis wise, that's what I would focus on. Otis Waters, I'm planning making a process doc about the creation of an album with an R&B artist and band. How do you think I can make this interesting for a wide range of people, not only for music fans? Like the biggest thing when you do films about artists or anything that I've learned, because I've done a bunch of them, is that if it's not an artist that's super famous or just breaks out and becomes this fantastic artist, nobody cares about it. Nobody cares. Like it's difficult to sell the film, it's difficult to get anybody to watch the film, and that I think it lends itself an opportunity to actually be more experimental in how you do it, and not so like what the artist wants is probably to have just like a regular behind the scenes type of doc, which is super boring and not inspiring or emotional in any way. They just want to have a sales film or whatever for their brand that they have. I hate that. That's why I don't like doing films with artists anymore. But if you can maneuver that and you can get an opportunity to actually tell a personal story, and you can get access to tell a personal story, then you can probably do something amazing. Because like the form of doing music docs is amazing. But the reason why you're not seeing many that are great is probably because like it's very hard to do one with artists because they're so like in their own brand, and they're not very interested in giving up and making the story be personal and authentic and intimate. So that's the challenge, I think, to find like how can you make this as intimate and emotional as you can, with the limitations that you're gonna have. Now R&B, maybe, depending on the person. If you're gonna have like a person that's more emotional, maybe, but you could also get like the other side of it, somebody being super into themselves and feeling like, oh, they have to be perfect all the time, and then you're gonna have trouble, I think, if that's the type of person that you're following. So yeah, think about those things. Alex Call, how did you develop the Born 1980 something movies? Are the characters all friends, or did you just pick up their stories, or did you search for special stories? How did you choose and find them? Like, most of them were my friends. It was something that I did a long time ago, and then they've just been laying around, and then I just need to get them out of my hard drive, so I just made them. But I think most of them are just friends. I don't know if there's anyone that isn't. I think most of them are my friends. I wanted to make that series like an ongoing thing, but the problem I felt was that when they're so unknown, they don't get any more views than I would if I was alone doing like storytelling with just myself. And it was so like much booking of people and all that it didn't feel worthwhile. I liked them though, but it wasn't worth the time long term. Yeah, and those were like totally unplanned, just going out there writing the questions on the way there, like very much so amateur type of way, but it can still turn out good. It just takes more time, and like I would say for shorts you really need to figure out like a form for the stuff before, and then when you have that, or while you're doing it, so like if you're making a series, you can figure out the form in the edit, how you would make them look similar. Last question by Alex, something completely different. How does Kino relate to Sweden, and how do they differ? Like, in many ways, like the location is totally Sweden. Like everything there looks like Sweden. It feels like Sweden, but it also feels like America. So I think that the whole conflict in itself, we try to find, and this is what I usually do nowadays, is try to find stories. Like if I'm going after a story, the story needs to be as extreme as it can be within the type of idea that I'm trying to tell, because that will lend itself a more cinematic way of telling the story. So you'll get like better scenes, better characters, all that. So you could do the same thing in Sweden, but it would be a little bit less and a little bit more boring, I think, because it's not as heightened. Like the conflict is not as heightened as it is in this place, because the characters are extreme, the place is extreme, the conflict in itself is extreme. It's absurd how first of all it's like First Nations that was discovered by Swedes, I think. Yeah, Gustafsons, I think. So there was Swedes that came there, discovered the place, exploited the place for themselves, but nobody else knew about it. They did it in hiding, and then somebody followed them there, and then all of a sudden, like the gold rush happened. So in a way, like it's totally related to Sweden, and I guess the people are very similar to Swedish, but at the same time, like they're so far away from what Swedes are as well. So there's so much resemblance, but it's such an extreme situation that differs. Like you wouldn't find that type of pollution in Sweden. You wouldn't find companies being able actually you would though. If you look at Malmberget, which is in the north of Sweden, there's this company that actually, a mining company that worked for many years, and eventually the city fell in, so they had to move the city. So in that sense, like if you did it there, then you could have done it. But that story, I've wanted to tell something about that before, but it was just over when I understood that it was going on. When I was doing Born 1980 something, by the way, I wanted to do a story up there. So this was many years ago. But like some stories that just go away, that would definitely, it could have been exactly the same story. They're on the same level as well in terms of Arctic Circle. So funny you asked. Yeah, and I also could you have found the story in those to make them more interesting for more people? They are great to watch. Are you meaning? meaning in Sweden, I guess. I just came to think of it now that if you would have done it there at the mine that kind of ate the city, if you would have done it there, then you have totally as eccentric people there. You might not have. You probably have hoarders as well, because like the people in Kino, they like collect everything. And you could probably find something similar. So if you look for it, you could probably find that. But I'm looking towards like English speaking countries as well, because it becomes more international just by doing that. Now I am doing one film in Sweden at the same time, so I usually try to have like different films going on. So we have one very Swedish film that's probably going to be international, but it's very Swedish in what the subject is. But you always need to focus around like getting the best story, and I don't know, I don't feel so interested in only doing Swedish films. That's just what I'm interested in. But anybody that likes doing like local stories because they care about those stories more, then do that. Like the stories that you care about the most, that's the ones that you should tell. I like to mix them because I don't want to get bored. That's